In a previous video, I stated that no one really anticipates a movie coming out anymore. But I have to admit that I was wrong. Some of us have been waiting with bated breath for Disney's latest so-called live-action remake of a classic, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But not for the reasons you think. For the last couple of years, the saga of this production has been doing the rounds of YouTube film and pop culture critics, thanks to the public statements of the star, Rachel Zegler, who famously disparaged the 1937 original while admitting she only saw it once and wasn't keen. She did change her tune, probably because the executives saw the backlash and finally learned that not all publicity is good publicity. The release was dogged with controversy too, being cancelled and scaled back as Disney were worried about popular reactions, with critical embargoes only being lifted at the last minute. Its opening weekend has been dreadful, and the usual suspects have been gleefully dancing on its grave, mocking Zegler for what they see as a toxically opinionated attitude that alienates potential fans and anyone who doesn't agree with her politics. The original is the movie that built the studio, has been a cash cow over the decades, so this should have been a commercial slam dunk. But the controversies of Zegler's views, her casting, and her reportedly fractious relationship with co-star Gal Gadot have beautifully poisoned the well and made this one of Disney's biggest disasters so far. One criticism critics make is that the major changes have taken a dump on the original and that it's sacrilegious, whether it be the new songs, removing some of the original songs, the look of the dwarfs, the gang of bandits, the knot prints and the general look and feel of it. This is a production that can do no right. These people are Disney fans and don't want the legacy they love being trashed. I, however, am not. I'm not a Disney hater, I've just never been that bothered. Brace yourself. But I have never seen The Lion King, and I don't feel the need. I have a Tesco Club Card app, and as I write this script, it's offering me 3 months Disney Plus free. I think it expires today, but I don't really care. Not even for the Marvel and Star Wars content. I think my favourite Disney cartoon movie is The Jungle Book, and I thought the remake was okay, though neither are my favourite Disney movie of all. That, of course, goes to Condor Man. And woe betide anyone who screws up any remake of that perfect gem. I've seen the original at least once, and that may have been at the cinema when it was re-released in the 90s briefly. It was fine, clearly a blueprint for all future Disney cartoons, but it hasn't had any real impact on my life. I respect the film and its legacy, but it doesn't mean that much to me. The remake of The Crow, one of my top 5 films of all time, was more of a big deal. I had planned to go and see that, but for some reason I missed it. So, I decided to give it a go, and I didn't even watch the original beforehand for a comparison. I decided that I wanted to watch this movie as fresh as possible, without being tainted by any more bias and preconception that I've already swallowed. First of all, the attendance. It was in one of the biggest screens at View Gulmouth Keys, with maybe 180 seats. I think it was a quarter full, and I have no idea if that's good for a Wednesday 7:45 evening showing. People have posted photos of empty screens, but do we know the context? What time of day was it? Were these people first in? I thought it was going to have a lot less than 10%, but as the trailer started, people flooded in, so those empty seat photos people posed can be set aside, though the poor opening gross does suggest a lot of unoccupied seats. The opening is a rather bland song and dance exposition that even the BBC balked at for pushing a certain left-wing ideology. It seems that pies are now political, and I have 2 pucker steak and kidneys in the freezer that might be waiting to convert me to the red wall. Despite telling Snow White that the land and its resources belong to the people, for the people, they live in a massive castle with more rooms and gardens than they could ever need, maintained by staff, and are assumedly in their position by right of birth. So if they do a bad job, the people have no right to get rid of them for someone better. So yeah, it's a bit like communism and fascism and constitutional monarchy, etc, etc. Mum dies, Gal Gadot shows up, looking insanely hot, and starts the takeover, forcing Snow White to be a scullery maid and cleaner after she tricks the king to go off into a non-existent battle and die off camera. Don't know why he didn't send out scouts to check what he was told, then he would know she was full of you-know-what. This is where we get the first big tune, sung about being the girl she knows she can be. First of all, it's derivative, using the standard tub-thumping drum beat that seems to pervade all musical theatre when the composer wants to get the audience's heart racing. We also get the first example of the jaw, where she juts it out and wiggles it in a way that makes her look like a 12-year-old trying to do adult emotional acting. It's so bizarre and distracting, and it looks too much like she's, well, acting. Snow White meets Jonathan, a bandit who has somehow managed to breach the heavily fortified and guarded castle to steal potatoes and is eventually caught. When Snow tries to reason with the Queen, trying to persuade her to be fair to the people, she talks about how they used to make pies for them. Here we get what may be the only legendary line from the film when the Queen says, "Pies are a luxury. They don't need luxuries." It confuses them. Pies again. When Snow helps Jonathan escape, the Queen orders her loyal huntsman to take Snow out for her first trip outside to pick apples in the forest, where he would kill her, cut out her heart, and stick it in a box. I have a question. On this trip, why does she suddenly have a lovely dress and nice hair? Who gave it to her, and why? Was it a special murder dress? Is it the kingdom's equivalent of the red shirt? Has she just appeared on 90s daytime show Style Challenge while having to listen to the irritatingly unfunny quips of host John Leslie? The forest would have been a relief. He pisses out of stabbing her, and she runs off, eventually being led to the house of the dwarfs by the animals. And along come the dwarfs. These freakish, motion captured weirdos are the best part of the film, even though they kind of feel out of place. Thanks to their Lord Peter Dinklage, dwarf actors were not hired, though it's not clear if those 7 people from that photo were meant as a replacement and the dwarfs are part of reshoots, or if this was a plan all along. The actors who did the physical acting are not dwarfs, which I get because they needed people with the physiology to do the song and dance routines. But did they need those routines? Did Willy Wonka look bad with the limited motion of the Oompa Loompas? Was anything wrong with the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz? They do the song in the mine and on the way home discover Snow, let her stay, introduce themselves, and it's bedtime. Hot Queen finds out Snow is alive thanks to the mirror. It's then that she checks the contents of the box. Why didn't she do that immediately? Huntsman is tortured, and Queenie does her one big song and dance routine that's a lot better than her rendition of Imagine. In the morning, the dwarves have a massive fight that trashes the house, where Grumpy swings down on a rope shouting Yippee-ki-yay. Snow stops them, shows that she has remembered their names because her mum told her it was important foreshadowing, and then makes them clean the place, rather than doing it herself out of gratitude for their kindness and hospitality, as in the original, all to the tune of a song that has forever been ruined by Dad's army. The whole name remember thing comes out of the blue. It wasn't part of the opening scene, which showed how down to earth Snow White was by making pies and sharing a garland with another girl. When she talks about leaving, they warn her about the bandits, who is one of the strangest pieces of dialogue in the history of cinema. I wish I could remember any of it or find it online, but it's so bizarre, bringing up socio-political conditions or something or other. It's hyper-political, technical, and devoid of any poetry, magic, or mystery. It's so dumb that I find it hard to believe that it wasn't meant as a joke. It just wasn't funny. She heads off and runs into Johnny Boy and his bandits, the 7 people who may or may not have been replacements for the dwarves originally. We learn nothing about these people other than one name that happens to be Quig, a dwarf, who is the only actual dwarf in the film. Johnny takes an arrow on the shoulder for Snow, and they all head back to the dwarves, where they think he's going to die, but he doesn't due to magic. Snow and the Black Girl bandits staying super close together, like they're supporting each other even though they haven't spoken, and it's really weird. There's no tension, no drama, no stakes. All sorted out with another boring song and dance. Johnny goes off as he thinks the king is still alive and gets captured and put in prison with the huntsman. Queen casts a spell, goes into the woods, tricks Snow into biting the apple, and Snow dies. The dwarves dash back thanks to being warned by the animals. They lay her on a rock and cry. Johnny Boy shows up after escaping, kisses her, and she's better. No tension, no drama, no stakes. All I could think of was Rammstein. She decides to confront the Queen and heads back wearing a long red cloak and hood she got somewhere, looking like one of Palpatine's personal bodyguards. Little Red Snow riding White Hood enters the town, a settlement that reminds me of the kind of place the crew of the Enterprise would go to, oddly small but weirdly significant in a vast land. She confronts the Queen, who challenges her to stab her, but Snow can't do it, and the Queen orders a random guard to knife her. That's when Snow wins the day by remembering his name, his family, and his life before the dominatrix came along. That's how she turns the castle guards against her, by remembering who they were and reminding them of how much of a better life they used to have. There's no setup for the Queen not knowing who the guards are, so even though it was foreshadowed, it doesn't really have any impact or meaning. A quick moment earlier with the Queen arrogantly not knowing someone's name would have helped, but clearly that was too hard for the writers. There's also no reason for them to revolt, given that they seem okay to serve her despite how she treats the people. For example, the main guard, Paul, has a scar on his face. Could there have been a story behind that? Did the Queen do it? Did she do something to his family? The bandits and dwarves show up and do pretty much nothing, the latter being diminished both physically and narratively. Queenie has a hissy fit, runs back to the mirror, which she smashes, it disintegrates her and swallows her inside while Snow watches, doing absolutely nothing. Everyone is happy. They all have a big song and dance, dressed in white like they're at a certain someone's famous parties. More flipping pies, the end. That's it. That's your lot. That is what $270 million gets you these days. Let's be honest here. This is not a good film at all. It's boring, derivative, disjointed, uninspiring, mediocre, pointless, and just bad. It could never be as groundbreaking as the original, but it could still have been good. People constantly deride the incessant spewing of remakes of classics, and that is valid, but this would have been a lot less if these films were actually good. If you love the original, then I can see why you would loathe this version. I don't, which probably explains why I'm nowhere near as negative as some people. I don't think you should only judge a film on its own. Context is key, and it cannot be ignored. This is a bad film, 100%, but I don't think it's as horrific as many critics are saying. Rachel Zegler is definitely a talented singer, and singing while acting is a skill all of its own. But she's only good when she doesn't have to act too much. She keeps doing this jaw acting and it's a bit distracting, but clearly the director thought it looked great and told her to keep doing it, so maybe she was just obeying orders. Gal Gadot is as good as one would expect of someone who delivered the heartfelt line, "Kal-El, no," in Justice League. She tries to ham it up, but she also feels restrained. It's like she studied Raul Julia in Street Fighter or Jeremy Irons in Dungeons & Dragons and rightly thought that was the way to go. But it was held back by a short-sighted director who was forced to take things too seriously by a producer too incapable of not spunking away nearly $300 million. The rest can be described by a single big shrug of the shoulders. Jonathan is fine, the dwarves or whatever they are, and the bandits have little impact and make even less sense. That photo of them in a field is from a scene that does not feature and has no obvious place in the story. Clearly this was from an original version that was binned as the cluster you-know-what became increasingly obvious. This film was doomed from very early on, and as the release has been shown to be a disaster, pretty much all of the blame and consequences have fallen on Rachel Zegler. Her interviews early in the publicity process were controversial from the get-go, and she was lambasted for being too ignorant and narcissistic. In the run-up to the release, she got increasingly political, further alienating large swathes of the potential audience and damaging the already shaky box office projections. She has been held up as a poster child for an industry that has been hyper-moralistic and political while being riddled with so many characters of dubious morality. I think this is unfair. She has said some really stupid things, and as an adult, she should bear her fair share of the blame. However, she's only 23, and these interviews were a couple of years old now. I find it hard to believe that she said these things in a vacuum. The things she said really felt like they were scripted and rehearsed, and that she was playing a role given to her. Yes, she could have been a lot less up herself, but no way was she riding solo. Even Gal Gadot shared her views, but she had the maturity to tone it down. I think she was very much on message and was allowed to run her mouth, but when the execs realised there was a backlash, they tried to rein her in, but it was too late. Now they are trying to sweep up a mess of their own making by saying that she spilled the milk. We now have this guy called Joshua Platt, son of the producer Mark Platt, who's whined about how his dad had to fly out to get her to toe the line, saying that her actions have caused all the problems and that she's a terrible person who ruined everything. He's being held up as a hero for publicly calling out Zegler for her toxic and arrogant behaviour and for being the one who tanked this movie. Trying to blame the failure of a $300 million movie on one young woman is nonsense. Rachel Zegler didn't write the script. She didn't decide not to hire dwarf actors. She didn't write the songs. She didn't design the settings. She didn't give Gal Gadot acting lessons. She didn't direct a single second. She didn't order the reshoots and she didn't sign off on the ridiculous production budget. That's all on Daddy Boy. We now hear that Zegler could be blacklisted from big budget productions. Her career was kind of screwed before it's even started. That really sucks. The film was financed by a mega studio, put together by two experienced producers, directed by an experienced auteur, written by an experienced wordsmith, composed by experienced musicians, and designed by expert visionaries. Zegler's role is big, but it's dependent on all these other people to make the whole. If this movie had been good, then Zegler's actions would have had a lot less impact. Word of mouth would have been positive. People would have taken more of a chance to go. This is a bad film, and Zegler is a fundamental part of it, but she's not the sole reason, nor is she the majority of the reason. The whole production and promotion has been a disaster, and Zegler is the patsy. Yes, she has a history of being really up herself, whether it be the early interviews, her West Side Story interview, acting like it was okay for a half Colombian, half Polish actress to play Puerto Rican, despite claiming representation was important, or whether it be her crying about not being invited to the Oscars and then being super smug when she guilt-tripped the Academy. She clearly has a high opinion of herself, and she needs bringing down a peg or two, but that doesn't justify what's happening now. Those who are truly responsible are already set to walk away, scot-free, free to earn big bucks and collect the accolades, despite being primarily responsible for one of the most pathetic disasters in the history of Hollywood. Zegler will probably be sidelined, and may never get another chance as good as this. Yes, she bears plenty of responsibility, but her actions early on seem like the actions of someone towing a line she'd been given by people higher up, telling her what to do, and now they are dumping it all on her shoulders. $270 million on a single movie. The Bad Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy cost $50 million, so given 20 years of inflation, that's about $80 million. The original trilogy could have been made with just Snow White's budget. Director Michael Cimino was blacklisted for the horrific budget overrun on Heaven's Gate that went to a mere $154 million in today's money. The Snow White producers have screwed up big time. So where is the outrage at them? Think about all the scripts someone has sitting on their desks that aren't getting greenlit because there's not enough money. How is that Zegler's fault? I hope she speaks out. I hope she tells her side of the story. If she does, she would be wise to say nothing bad about Gal Gadot, and that fractious relationship has been another stick to beat her with. I would love it if she said what she thinks of the producer and his little nepo baby boy. I hope she talks about the early filming and all the reshoots. I hope she talks about how the promotion was planned out early on and how her role was defined. She would definitely have to show contrition, but she shouldn't shy away from reminding anyone that she was in charge of nothing, and that those who led the way were sickeningly free from criticism and consequences. Ultimately, though, she's getting the raw end of the stick. But I guess, as she once said, that's Hollywood, baby.